Cara Cifelli, thank you so much for joining us on the Plant Trainers podcast today.
Yay, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you guys.
So are we. I love the avocado behind you in the poster. For those people watching on YouTube, they can see. It's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm not subtle about the affection that I have for California avocados.
And living in California, you get them as ripe can be.
Sometimes I'm not sure. Like, I have so many reasons for living here, and I'm pretty sure. I didn't mean to say not sure. I'm pretty sure a good portion of that is like avocados.
Do you get to pick them directly off a tree? Because
You
that
know what?
that would be
I
cool.
haven't gone avocado picking, but I've had friends that have had avocado trees.
Oh,
That would be
interesting.
fun.
That's a good reason to move to
It
California.
is.
So besides avocados, do you have anything that you're grateful for today?
Yeah, I thought about this before we started recording, and something that's really been coming up for me a lot is sisterhood and friendships with women, not like in my community of other entrepreneurs and health coaches and life coaches. I grew up having a lot of like breakdowns in female friendships and a lot of competition and a lot of fights in school and not feeling like I fit in. And so for a while, I just didn't have sisterhood. And now I have so many great girlfriends, and I like don't know how I could do life without them. And I'm really grateful for them.
Do you think that having confident friendships help people make better health choices?
Yes, because having human connection and relationships is a key component of health, right? Like solitude confinement is a punishment because humans are not meant to be alone. So, yeah, I think that having friendships is fundamental. Having good relationships is fundamental to like overall health, like not just from a physical standpoint, but looking at it holistically, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I find that with my girlfriends when we're talking about, what we ate or what we did to work out or what we did on the weekend, we're constantly inspiring each other to say, I haven't done that in a while. Maybe I should try that. Or I never heard of that. So just through regular conversation without even meaning to teach, we have very big teachable moments that we can share with friends.
Yeah, or like, the weather's great out here almost always. And so going out hiking with your girlfriends is like, it's just like, let's go hang out and hike and walk and talk and be outside. So it's also just like a great activity, like being active together. It just happens all the time in where I live. I know the weather's
I was
different
gonna
across
say,
the
and we're like,
country.
let's go build a
Yeah.
snowman. No.
Or let's stay
Or
inside
let's stay
and
inside.
hibernate for the winter.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally. So where did your plant-based journey begin? Why don't you take us on that journey?
Yeah, so my plant-based journey started in recovery from an eating disorder. So around the age 14, 15, I started to be really hyper aware of what my body looked like. I became very insecure and very aware of the fact that like people were looking and people were paying attention. So like seeing media, like different magazines, Us Weekly, America's Next Top Model, I became like hyper fixated on what I looked like and what my body looked like. And I was very insecure and wanted to be like pretty enough and thin enough so that people would like me. And I was taught that like the way that I could do that was restrict my food and eat as little as possible, only eat what I thought was like going to not make me gain weight. And that intense restriction led to a bout of anorexia, but then eventually rebounded into binge eating and bulimia. And so I would try to eat perfectly all day long, whatever my version or idea of perfect was at the time. But that restriction and trying to rely on willpower and like trying to like not eat all day was not sustainable. Like the human body needs food. And so I would rebound into binge eating. And the binge eating was like intense eating to the point of being so uncomfortably full. And then in combination with like being so afraid of weight gain, I started to purge. And I had this for 7 years. And then the remaining 3 years, so I kind of say it's a decade, is the last 3 years I had chose to recover. Like I had a rock bottom moment and really decided like, okay, you're either going to die or you're going to get better. Like you can't keep living like this. It's overtaking every aspect of my life. It's affecting work. It's affecting school. It's affecting my relationships. It's affecting my mental health. Like I couldn't go on. And so I made this decision of like, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get better. And there were a couple of components that played a role in my healing process, like going to personal development work, engaging in a yoga practice that really helped me get out of my head, because like eating disorders are so obsessive in your mind, obsessively thinking about food and micromanaging. So yoga really helped me get into my body and process emotions and take off stress. And another component of that was stumbling upon plant-based diets. So for me, my eating disorder was like Atkins. It was like no carbs. I was petrified of fruit, petrified of rice, bread, potatoes. And so my eating disorder was like meat and cheese based. Was like I can only eat that because it's the only thing that's going to keep me thin. I grew up in the Atkins era. And I stumbled upon plant-based diets like Colin Campbell's book, The China Study. I stumbled upon Food Inc. and Forks Over Knives on Netflix. And it helped me make peace with carbs. Like Colin Campbell's books, he talks about lentils and sweet potatoes and brown rice being these healing things that are good for the body. And I was like, what? Never heard that before. You're kidding. I can eat this? Like, this is okay. And so plant-based eating allowed me to see like food could be about taking care of my actual health. Like it wasn't just about being the skinniest, prettiest, thinnest version of myself. It was like, oh, this is good for my heart. This is good for my digestion. This is good for my eyes. This is good for my brain. I can keep this food in my body and feel really good about it. And then I became enraged with what I learned in the documentaries, like just about the corruption with like how our government and regulatory agencies were then board members of these large food companies, and they were creating farm subsidies that was affecting the prices of food. So like Twinkies are cheaper than carrots. And I just became so angry about the environment and factory farms. And that anger was incredibly transformative for me, because for my life before that, I was just angry at myself for not being good enough, for not being thin enough, for not being able to stick to my diet. And for the first time in my life, I was like angry about something so much bigger than me. And it took the attention off of me. And I was like, wow, look at all of the stuff that's happening in our world. I want to be a part of this change. I want to shop locally and go to the farmers markets, and I want to take care of the environment. And that anger like supported me in just making it not about me anymore and being a part of something bigger. And that was so transformative.
So going back, and thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that it's not easy, and I know that it's going to help other people by sharing that. What stuck in my head is that you said you learned that you can be that person by restricting calories and restricting food. How do you think you learned that?
You mean like to be thin and pretty and stuff?
Yeah.
From so many avenues. So I learned it from magazines, like, like women's health magazines. I learned it from the way that the women in my life talked about their food and their bodies. And like mostly magazines, media, TV, and the people in my life, like calories in, calories out type of a thing.
So I see a lot of this still happening because I deal with 15 and 16-year-olds all the time. If you had the opportunity to take what you know now and speak to some of those teenagers, or even talk to your teenage self, what would you tell them at this point?
That they deserve to be fed and they deserve to eat food that feels good and that tastes good and that nourishes their body, and that they can learn to accept themselves, and that they have so much more to offer the world than just what they look like. And that food can be fun. Learning when I was in the recovery process, I stepped into the kitchen. I wasn't really like anyone who played with food really or tried to cook, and I started cooking and teaching myself how to cook plant-based foods and recipes, and it made it fun. So like also finding a creative outlet. For some people that might be cooking, for others it could be painting or something else, but that you deserve to be fed, and that we need food to nourish and to feel good and to thrive. Like I physically did not feel well having an eating disorder and binging and purging, and I had a ton of joint pain. And I had never considered that it was from dairy. I was told my whole life by my doctors and my parents that you're just having growing pains. It never crossed my mind. And it was when I had taken dairy out of my diet, my joint pain went away. I was like, oh, this is radical. I had no idea that like I just like felt so crappy and then all of a sudden I started feeling better and I was like, wow, this is crazy that like just not eating this thing made such a difference in my body.
Yeah, I think it's amazing the power of food has on our body, and people don't realize it until they start to make changes. And with nutrition these days, I mean, you talked about Atkins, there's been so many different varieties of that diet, whether it's the zone or the paleo or the keto. They're all versions of the Atkins, and people are really scared away from eating carbs right now. And it's so important for people to really find the resources like Dr. Colin Campbell and the China Study and Food Inc. and Forks Over Knives and all those great resources that are out there to help them understand nutrition on a different level so that they could actually let the food impact their bodies in a positive way, which is not something they're necessarily taught to do in school.
Yeah, yeah. And also I would add to that, like when you were asking me about my younger self, it was like, yeah, like you can eat carbs, like it's okay. Like rice, sweet potatoes, fruit, like these are great things for the human body. Like you're allowed to enjoy them. You're allowed to have bread. Like it's okay, you know.
I
And
think, oh, go ahead.
no, that's okay. You go first.
I was going to say, I think what I'm taking away, if we could kind of wrap it up in a package, is that if we eat to feel good, then we will in turn look good. Right? So instead of eating to lose weight, instead of eating to, be as skinny as somebody, I mean, we have an understanding that the girls that we see, the models that we see are highly edited, right? Like, so that's not real life. But if we eat to feel good, so our joints feel good, our energy feels good, we're eating the foods that are nourishing our body, giving us the energy to go out and hike, usually in return our body will thank us, and it will be a good size in a lot of situations. I mean, of course, if there's hormonal dysfunction, if there's other things, we hold on to weight for anxiety reasons and all of that. But for an otherwise healthy 14-year-old or 15-year-old, that's what's going to happen. And I think that we don't teach people about feeling good. We teach people about looking good. So I'm wondering, as you went through this stage in your life, what was happening on the outside of your body? Were you wearing a lot of makeup? Were you trying to wear the best clothes too? Was it only about your body, or was it about your outward look overall?
I mean, it was about my worth at its core because I felt like what defined my worth and my enoughness was like fitting society's idea of beauty. I never wore a ton of makeup. I would have moments where I would wear makeup like going out, but I've always been someone that doesn't wear a lot of makeup, mostly just from like laziness, I guess, or like not wanting to take the time. I would have moments though where I'd put it on when we'd go out and get dressed up. But for me, it was just like it was just trying to be the skinniest possible, like because that it was just that is I thought that that was the way that I would get love and acceptance. I wasn't someone struggling with like a ton of acne um or like my hair didn't look a certain way or like my eyes were bloodshot. Like for me, it was really just about my body size. But I physically like didn't the two big things that I was dealing with were like headaches and joint pain. And those two things went away when I started changing what I was eating, how I was eating, and why I was eating.
Shash, you mentioned before about feeling good with the food that you eat, and I think you clarified it a little bit, but it's very easy for someone to then go and eat cake and chocolate and candy, and that makes them feel good. But that's not the kind of food that we're talking about and how we're making ourselves feel good. So I just wanted to make sure that's clear.
I'm not talking about, being sad and eating some Oreo cookies and saying, okay, I could take on the world now. I'm talking about your joints and your energy levels, and from a physical point of view. And a lot of people, and I think it's something that I experienced, don't realize that they're not feeling well until they feel better, right, until they embrace the plant-based diet, and all of a sudden they're like, whoa, like that's what I could feel like. That's what I'm supposed to feel like. But when you actually do suffer with headaches and migraines and joint pain and stomach issues, there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that coming from like my line of work where I work with women who have disordered eating and eating disorders, a lot of us are afraid that if we give ourselves permission to like have the cake, for example, that you were mentioning, that we'll like never stop eating it. But what I have found is that like you'll start to feel physically crabby, like lethargic. You'll feel bloated. You'll have indigestion. You're like physically not going to feel well. And so you're not going to want to keep eating that way. Like you're going to want to get better. And so what I have found is when we do start to pay more attention to our body signals, how it's actually feeling, how food makes us feel, that we end up like reprioritizing nutrient dense foods from a place of wanting to take care of ourselves, not wanting to control ourselves. And so it becomes a way that's like really easy for you to take care of your health that way. It's not like force, it's not control. Yeah.
How would somebody know when they're on the verge of eating disorder as opposed to practicing discipline in not taking part in the cake very often and stuff like that? Like where's that fine line for somebody where they can start to notice that they're going downhill and they need to intervene now before they hit rock bottom like you did?
The way that I look at it is it's like the place from which you're choosing it. So if you want to have a piece of cake because it's your friend's birthday and you're celebrating and it's community, like that's great. Enjoy that piece of cake. Enjoy being with your friends and family. Like food has cultural meaning. But if you're choosing that food from a place of like shame or make wrong or punishing yourself, or if it's your primary way to deal with problems. So like we talk a lot about binge eating and emotional eating as a way to like avoid dealing with the issues. So I think that it's turning inward and really looking at like, okay, where are my motivations? Like, why am I doing this? And is this actually really serving me? So it's not like, it's not just like cake is completely wrong, but it's like, why are we eating it?
Yeah, I think that's what it is for a lot of things. When it starts to overcome you, when it starts to interfere with the way that you run your life, when your values are not necessarily showing up in your actions the same way as you feel in your heart, that's when you notice that you have a problem in many different areas. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, going back to your values. Yeah, absolutely. And where is it coming from?
So you mentioned earlier finding something that you like to do, whether it's painting or in your case, cooking. How did you realize that cooking was something that you wanted to get into? I mean, food was all over your life, clearly. So I guess it kind of made sense to keep it there. But how did you get into actually enjoying the cooking process and getting into what you're now doing?
Great question. It happened organically. I don't know if it was like intentional, if it was like actually like a choice, like, oh, I'm going to start doing this. I think it was being really inspired by what I was learning. I think it was me wanting to eat foods that I felt really good about eating and that I was like, okay, I'm going to keep this in my body. This is really good. And I very quickly just found it fun. I was like, oh, this is really creative. I started reading vegan blogs. I started a vegan blog. I started posting pictures on Instagram and I found like this massive community of people in LA and it became fun. I made friends through it and it just gradually built on itself. I don't know if I like intentionally was like, I'm going to start cooking and see if I like it. I don't think it happened that way. I think it was like just something I started to do in that process. And I was really bad at first. Like I have an inside joke with my friends about the first soup that I made them. And I was like, I'm going to put a lot of bay leaves in it because bay leaves, like they're going to make it delicious. And the soup was awful. And so now we'll have a joke if I'm cooking dinner or like we've been making a lot of recipes from the cookbook that I just released. And they're like, well, remember that time you made a soup? And I was like, yeah, I do. And so it just became fun and like a way to express myself. And I made friends through it. And yeah, I just like learned over time and it's a big part of my life now. I cook every day. Yeah.
I get you on the soup thing for sure. The first time I made butternut squash soup, I put the butternut squash in the oven for like, 15 minutes and then put it in the pot with some broth and pureed it up.
I don't think it was cooked at all when you did it.
It was like 15 minutes. It was not enough. It was not cooked. It was completely raw and it was completely gross. So yeah, I get you on that. And it's kind of funny how the one thing that kind of was bringing you down all along was the thing that ended up kind of saving you in the end too. So it kind of comes full circle. Having Italian heritage and not having, like a lot of parents or grandparents will teach their children or grandchildren to cook. Is that something that you had avoided over that decade? And if I can ask, and if you want to say pass, you could say pass. were you still being offered food throughout this? Like, where was your connection with the family, and how did they react throughout the eating disorder?
Yeah, great question. So my family had moved, most of my family's in Chicago, and my family had moved to Arizona. So I wasn't around my Italian family growing up. We moved when I was 3. And my mom would cook, but from necessity, not for like a love of cooking. My mom is not my Italian side of the family, my dad is. And so I didn't really grow up with like family and food, and like sure we cooked on Thanksgiving and ate as a family, but we were always playing sports and we would hit up drive-throughs and it would be like pasta with ragu sauce and a lot of like pizza pockets and things like that growing up. So cooking wasn't really a big part of my childhood, and I didn't like inherit any family recipe. So it was like non-traditional in that sense. Now, had I grown up in Chicago and how we stayed, I definitely think that that would have been the case because my grandma was a huge cook and always cooked constantly for everybody all of the time. And I had so many aunts and uncles and cousins there. But because we had moved away, it wasn't how my childhood was. And when I was struggling with my eating disorder, I got so good at hiding it. When I had come out about it, nobody knew. I was just seen as like the healthy one who was like always getting the salads and like always exercising. And so I had gotten really good at hiding it, and I kept it to myself and nobody knew. And part of that is also because at the time my parents were going through a really difficult, acrimonious divorce. So they were also a little distracted and maybe not paying attention to me. I was the middle child with 2 brothers, and I was just like the one that kept to herself and like did pretty good at school and like didn't cause any trouble. And so no, I don't think anyone was looking. And I also don't know that anyone had they didn't know what to look for. I think that I was exhibiting disordered eating behaviors and it was obvious, but it was only obvious if you knew what to look for. I think from the outside, I just looked like the healthy one, but really I was incredibly unhealthy for a number of reasons.
So let's bring this back to the family if we can, and say if someone's raising children and they want to foster good habits, we talk all the time about sitting and eating as a family, right? I think that that's so important. Being busy, going through drive-throughs, really easy to lose track of what's going on. But also I think a lot of the confidence and communication and relationship that we're able to build with our children as we sit at the table and talk to them and communicate with them is really important too. And they're young, not to say that nothing can happen at any age, but they are young. But hopefully continuing this through their teenage years when this is probably a little bit more prevalent than, the preteen. What other kind of advice do you have for parents listening who don't want to overthink it, but can maybe do a little bit more to foster good eating habits so that their children don't end up having an eating disorder?
So not being a mom,
right,
and not having kids myself, I will answer this to the best of my ability. And if you're a mom and you think I'm cray-cray, just take it or leave it. But what I would say based on my own experience of just being a child is I think that for me, because my mom was also really focused on weight loss and like trying to be thin, and that dieting was something that had just happened, and her talking negatively about her body, that was probably the most influential thing in terms of just like the family environment that I was in. I think that if we had maybe cooked together, it might have been more helpful had we prioritized family meal times, which was like not really a thing. Like we were all playing different sports at different times. But I think the way that, my mom had, and I love her and I don't blame her at all. Like she was obviously impacted the same way I was by like wanting to have her body look a certain way. But the way that she talked about herself and the way that she talked about food of like, oh, I need to like eat less or not eat this because I need to lose weight, that I inherited that. So I think languaging is important, but past that, like, I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer just like not having kids,
Right. We've talked about it a few times, and it really comes down to building a solid, positive relationship with your kids, open line of communication, and setting a positive example and being a role model, and making sure that your kids can be heard and are there to understand that you're there for them. But it's a very complicated situation, and everybody's going to handle it differently. There's no one answer.
Thing, but your experience in that, I think, is very helpful to the way people speak, not only in front of their own children, because there have been times where I've gotten into conversations with people where my children are in earshot.
They hear everything.
They hear everything, and they'll bring up the word diet, or they'll say, oh, I hate my this. And I'll be like, can we talk about this another time? Like, I want to get into this with you, but like not in front of my kids, because I don't want them to be exposed to that. And I do have to check myself at the door sometimes too, because we all have areas that we're working on, you know, even wondering, you know, if I want stronger muscles, how is that influencing them? So making sure that it's in a positive way. So there's so much there as well. So now that you are in the kitchen and you've learned, what is it that you really love and enjoy cooking the most besides avocados? Or you could include avocados.
Maybe she doesn't even like cooking with avocados.
Do you cook with avocados, or do you prep with avocados? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I actually think like I've once maybe tried to like fry an avocado like in panko breadcrumbs, like, you know, fair style, where you get like deep fried everything.
Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, they're like more like a condiment, or like keep them raw.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. I mean, I am someone that likes to at least once a week make something new that I've never made before. And that's something that keeps it fresh and fun, and trying to not get too much in like a rut where you're making the same things and bored. So always looking for new recipes, or always being inspired. There's, you know, amazing restaurants in LA. And so I'll get inspired by something I see on a menu or something that I try, and I'll try to recreate it. But I love quick and easy stuff. So like I'm an entrepreneur like you guys, run my own business. And when I'm done with work for the day, I want a delicious meal that like tastes good, but that isn't massively laborious. So for me, that like Buddha bowls are something we make all of the time, like finding some type of grain, some type of bean or other protein, like fried tofu is a big one in our house, and like different roasted vegetables. And I find that I can have like a great meal in like 30 minutes. And that's probably what I make most of the time, is just some variation of that, in addition with finding something really new and fun.
Yeah, that's great. Your newest book, The Vegan Buddha Bowls, is out now. And so in that recipe book, which bowl is your favorite?
Oh, wow. Loaded
I know
question.
it's hard to pick with just one, but if someone was to pick up that book, which would be the first one that they should be making? Because it's just so incredible.
Well, I think a great place to start if you're new, like let's say you're new to plant-based eating, or you're new to cooking, or you're not sure anything's going to be delicious. I have what's called the classic Buddha bowl, which is like what you see, I feel like, all over Instagram, which is like sweet potatoes, chickpeas, quinoa, steamed kale, avocado, and like a maple tahini drizzle. And it's like a classic combination. You can't mess it up, in my opinion. And I think it's a great place to start. It's a great introduction. And then there's a lot of other recipes that are more playful and maybe new flavor combinations. And I feel like that one's really approachable. Like most of us know what sweet potatoes are and quinoa. And that's a great place to start.
What do you think makes the bowl? Is it the combination of the main ingredients, or is it the sauce?
Oh man, I mean, I feel like a good sauce can take the most boring thing elevated.
Okay, but I don't think that sweet potato and black beans together doesn't need sauce to me, because I just think
that's
they're
the thing.
just
We
great
don't
together.
do a lot of sauce in this house.
Right.
I kind of just put the
Are you
food on the
spices?
table.
I just go straight up. Like I just love the actual flavor of the sweet potato mixed with the black beans. Sometimes I'll add some nooch to it, but I could just eat it straight up without any spice or sauce or anything, because it's just so good.
I do like sauces though, but I don't make them a ton. I don't make them a ton because I don't know. I feel like I should make a little bit more. I want to make something a little bit like I've been into balsamic vinegar lately, so I just kind of pour that on top, but I'd like to make it richer and add some things. So what do you recommend for a balsamic kind of drizzle?
Well, I mean, if you want to make a balsamic reduction and get like super fancy up in the kitchen, that's not a bad idea. And you can make a balsamic reduction just by reducing it down. But a lot of recipes will call for putting like some type of sugar in there to make it more of a syrup. Choose to make it however you want. But like a classic combination is just olive oil and balsamic vinegar.
The best thing about this is that people always say, you know, plant-based food, vegan food, it's so boring. All you do is eat lettuce. And if people actually looked on Instagram at all the different bowls or picked up your book, I'm sure they would now learn that there's so many other options, and the food looks beautiful and it tastes beautiful, and you could put all these different combinations together. We don't just eat lettuce, right? Like, it's so fun.
Yes. So my boyfriend has broadened his horizons just living with me and dating me in terms of like the cooking and the kitchen and like kitchen. And I think a lot of people would say this. I eat a much wider variety of foods now than I did before,
For sure.
and like every time I go to the farmer's market, there's like a new herb or a new vegetable. And I'm like, I have no idea what this is. I'm going to like buy it and Google it and see what I can do with it. So I definitely think that there's way more to plant-based eating than salad for sure. And I find that it's wide variety. Yeah, there's so much to choose from and endless combinations and flavors and yeah, so much to discover. Way more than lettuce.
Totally.
So, what kind of message do you have that you'd like people to know, or what kind of advice can you leave people with if they are coming out of an eating disorder, or whether it's big or small, and embracing a plant-based lifestyle? What is some of the biggest takeaways that they need to have?
Mm. Well, I think that like if you want to edit this out, go ahead. What I've learned is that for some people, transitioning to a plant-based diet might not be helpful for them, that not everybody is going to find recovery and healing process this way. It might look different for them. So whatever is going to work for them, I acknowledge them to follow and trust their gut and do what is going to help them get out of their eating disorder, because eating disorders are the most deadly mental illness has the highest rate of death amongst all mental illnesses. So it is dangerous. So get help and do what you need to do. And what I would say is to reach out for help, is to voice that you need help. That would be like step one, to admit you have a problem and ask for help. And I think for the longest time, I was ashamed of what I was going through and I was afraid to ask for help. And so I struggled with it longer than I maybe needed to. No regrets at all. I learned a lot from that experience, but the first thing I would say is to like reach out for help, that you don't have to go through it alone and that there are resources available to you, and to know that you can have a really awesome, beautiful relationship with food, that no matter how far gone you are or how difficult it is for you, that healing is possible and that you can really get to a place where food is joy-filled and not fear-based.
Yeah, I love that. And it's really important that everybody does understand that we're not just saying go plant-based and that's going to solve your eating disorder, because that's definitely not the route. It's just something that could come later that will change other aspects of your life. And you definitely need to manage and deal with the eating disorder when you're ready to, and get the help that you really do need to be able to get there. If people want to reach out to you, Cara, where would you like them to go so that they can, learn more about you and get your book?
Thank you so much. Cara's Kitchen, Cara with a C, Kitchen with a K, on Instagram. It's also on my website, caraskitchen.net. And then Vegan Bootables is wherever books are sold: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, maybe at your local retailer if they're badass and they picked it up.
That's amazing. I want to thank you again so much for sharing your story, for being so vulnerable, for sharing your expertise in this area now. When people have heard at the beginning that this can be triggering for some people. So if we always encourage people sharing out our podcast, but if they do believe that it will be triggering for somebody, that they should move with caution, right? That they should move with caution and let them know that in advance. But we really do think that your story of overcoming is amazing. We're so proud of you for the books that you've put out, and we're just really excited for Bootables.
And we're going to link to all the info that you gave us just now at planttrainers.com, and people can go to our show notes to grab those links. So thanks so much, Cara, for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, you guys. This was great.